Sarah Chen walked into the police academy training facility on a cold Monday morning in March. At 19 years old and barely 5 feet 3 inches tall, she looked more like a college student than someone who wanted to become a police officer. Her black hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and she wore the standard training uniform that seemed too big for her small frame. The other recruits were already gathered in the main hall. There were 42 people in her class, and Sarah quickly noticed she was one of only 6 women. Most of the men were tall, muscular, and looked like they had been preparing for this moment their entire lives. Some had military backgrounds, others had studied criminal justice in college, and a few came from families where being a police officer was a tradition passed down through generations. Sarah had none of these advantages. She grew up in a small apartment with her grandmother after her parents died in a car accident when she was 12. Her grandmother worked 2 jobs to make ends meet, and Sarah spent most of her teenage years helping to take care of the household. She had always been quiet and studious, preferring books to sports, and had never imagined herself in a career that required physical strength and confrontation. But everything changed 6 months earlier, when she witnessed a robbery at the corner store near her home. An elderly man was buying groceries when 2 young men entered with weapons. They demanded money and threatened the store owner, Mr. Kim, who had always been kind to Sarah and her grandmother. Sarah watched from behind a display rack as Mr. Kim, hands shaking, opened the cash register and handed over the money. What bothered Sarah most was not just the robbery itself, but what happened afterward. When the police arrived, they asked a few questions, took some notes, and left. Mr. Kim told Sarah later that he doubted anything would come of it. He had been robbed twice before, and nothing ever happened to the criminals. The old man seemed resigned to the fact that this was just part of life in their neighborhood. That night, Sarah could not sleep. She kept thinking about Mr. Kim's defeated expression and the way the robbers had laughed as they left the store. She realized that someone needed to stand up for people like Mr. Kim, for elderly people and families who worked hard but had no one to protect them. That was when she decided to apply to the police academy. Her grandmother was worried when Sarah announced her decision. "You are too small, too gentle," her grandmother said in her broken English. "Police work is dangerous. What if something happens to you?" Sarah understood her grandmother's concerns, but she had made up her mind. Now, standing in the academy hall, Sarah began to wonder if her grandmother had been right. The instructor, Sergeant Martinez, was a large man with graying hair and arms, like tree trunks. He had been a police officer for 25 years and had a reputation for being tough on recruits. "Welcome to the hardest 6 months of your lives," Sergeant Martinez announced to the group. "Some of you think you know what police work is about because you watched movies or TV shows. Let me tell you right now, you know nothing. We are going to teach you everything from the beginning, and many of you will not make it to graduation day." He walked slowly through the group, looking each recruit up and down. When he reached Sarah, he stopped and stared at her for a long moment. "What is your name, recruit?" "Sarah Chen, sir," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Sarah Chen," he repeated slowly. "Tell me, Sarah Chen, why do you want to be a police officer?" Sarah felt all eyes on her. She knew this was an important moment, but she was not prepared for the attention. "I want to help protect people who cannot protect themselves, sir." Sergeant Martinez raised an eyebrow. "That is a nice answer, recruit. Very noble. But police work is not about being noble. It is about being strong, fast, and tough. It is about making split-second decisions that could mean life or death. It is about facing criminals who would hurt you without thinking twice." He gestured toward Sarah's small frame. "Look at yourself, Recruit Chen. You are tiny. If a 200-pound man decides he does not want to be arrested, how exactly are you going to stop him? Are you going to ask him nicely to put on handcuffs?" Some of the other recruits began to snicker quietly. Sarah felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment, but she forced herself to stand straight and look Sergeant Martinez in the eye. "I will find a way, sir." "You will find a way," he repeated, and now several recruits were laughing openly. "That is your plan? To find a way?" Sergeant Martinez shook his head. "This is not a movie, Recruit Chen. In the real world, good intentions are not enough. You need strength, speed, and the ability to handle a weapon properly. Without those things, you are not just useless, you are dangerous. You could get yourself killed, or worse, you could get your partner killed. The laughter grew louder. Sarah heard someone whisper, "What is she even doing here?" Another voice said, "She looks like she should be working in a library, not carrying a gun." Sergeant Martinez held up his hand for silence. "Here is what we are going to do. Tomorrow morning, we start physical training. We will see how tough our library girl really is. If she can keep up, maybe she has a chance. If not, she can go home, to her books." Sarah felt tears beginning to form in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had expected the training to be difficult, but she had not expected to be singled out and humiliated on the first day. As the group was dismissed for lunch, she walked alone to the cafeteria while the other recruits formed small groups and talked excitedly about the training ahead. During lunch, Sarah sat by herself at a small table in the corner. She picked it, her sandwich without really eating, still thinking about what had happened in the hall. Part of her wanted to leave right then, to go home and forget about this whole idea. Maybe her grandmother had been right. Maybe she was not cut out for this kind of work. But then she remembered Mr. Kim's face, and the faces of other people in her neighborhood who needed someone to stand up for them. She thought about her parents, and how proud they would have been to see their daughter trying to make a difference in the world. Sarah finished her sandwich, threw away her trash, and walked back to the training facility with new determination. She would show Sergeant Martinez and everyone else that size and strength were not the only things that mattered in police work. The next morning arrived with gray clouds and cold wind. Sarah woke up before her alarm clock, having barely slept through the night. Her stomach was twisted in knots as she put on her training clothes and prepared for what she knew would be the most challenging day of her life so far. The physical training began at 6 o'clock sharp. Sergeant Martinez stood in the center of the academy's outdoor training area, wearing a whistle around his neck and holding a clipboard. The 42 recruits lined up in neat rows, and Sarah noticed that she had been placed in the front row where everyone could see her. "Today we find out who belongs here and who should go home," Sergeant Martinez announced. "We will start with a 2-mile run followed by push-ups, sit-ups, and obstacle course training. The standards are not negotiable. If you cannot meet them, you fail." The run began, and immediately Sarah found herself struggling to keep up. The other recruits, especially the men, moved ahead of her with long, powerful strides. Her short legs had to work twice as hard to cover the same distance, and within the first quarter mile, she was already breathing heavily. "Come on, Chen!" someone shouted from behind her. "My grandmother runs faster than that." The comment was followed by laughter from several other recruits. Sarah tried to ignore the taunts and focus on her breathing, just as she had read in the training manual she had studied before coming to the academy. But the gap between her and the main group kept growing wider. By the time she reached the halfway point, she was running alone, with only a few other struggling recruits behind her. Her lungs burned and her legs felt like lead, but Sarah refused to stop. She thought about giving up with every step, but something inside her pushed her forward. When she finally crossed the finish line, she was nearly 4 minutes behind the fastest runner, a former Marine named Jackson, who barely seemed winded. Sergeant Martinez looked at his stopwatch and shook his head. "Chen, that time would not qualify you to chase a criminal walking at a normal pace, let alone running." More laughter erupted from the group. The push-up test was even worse. The male recruits were required to do 40 push-ups, while the women had to complete at least 25. Sarah managed only 18 before her arms gave out completely. She collapsed onto the ground, her muscles trembling with exhaustion. 18 push-ups, Sergeant Martinez announced loudly. "That is not even enough to subdue a 12-year-old troublemaker, let alone an adult criminal." During the sit-up portion, Sarah performed better, managing to complete the minimum requirement, but just barely. By this point, sweat was pouring down her face and she was breathing so hard that she felt dizzy. The obstacle course was the final test of the day. It included climbing over walls, crawling under barriers, jumping through tire formations, and Scaling a rope. Sarah watched as the other recruits moved through the course with varying degrees of success. Even the slower ones managed to complete it within the time limit. When Sarah's turn came, she approached the first obstacle, an 8-foot wall that had to be climbed without assistance. She jumped up and tried to grab the top edge, but her fingers barely reached it. She tried again and again, each time falling back to the ground with a thud. "Need a ladder, Chen?" Someone called out. Maybe a helicopter? The laughter was constant now. Sarah felt humiliated, but she kept trying. Finally, after nearly a dozen attempts, she managed to pull herself up high enough to get one arm over the wall. Using every bit of strength she had left, she struggled and clawed her way to the top, then dropped down to the other side. The rest of the course was a nightmare. She crawled through the mud under the barriers, her uniform becoming completely filthy. The tire jumping section left her stumbling and nearly falling several times, and the rope climb was impossible for her. No matter how hard she tried, she could not pull herself up more than a few feet before sliding back down. When time was called, Sarah had only completed about half of the obstacle course. She stood there covered in mud and sweat, breathing heavily and feeling completely defeated. The other recruits had finished and were watching her with expressions ranging from amusement to pity. Sergeant Martinez walked over to where Sarah stood. "Recruit Chen," he said in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "In my 25 years of training police officers, I have never seen a performance quite like that. You failed the run, failed the push-ups, barely passed the sit-ups, and could not complete the obstacle course." Sarah felt tears threatening again, but she forced herself to look directly at Sergeant Martinez. "Yes, sir," she said quietly. "Yes, sir," he repeated. "That is all you have to say? Do you understand what just happened here, recruit? You have proven beyond any doubt that you do not have the physical abilities required for police work. A criminal could overpower you in seconds. Your fellow officers would constantly have to worry about protecting you instead of doing their jobs." The sergeant walked in a slow circle around Sarah, like a predator circling its prey. "I have seen small officers before, Recruit Chen. Some of them were excellent police officers. But they had something you clearly do not have. They had determination, they had heart, and they had the intelligence to find ways to compensate for their physical limitations. You, on the other hand, seem to have given up before you even started." "I did not give up, sir," Sarah said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "I completed everything I could complete." "You completed everything you could complete," Sergeant Martinez repeated mockingly. "That is exactly the problem, recruit. What you could complete is not nearly enough. In police work, there is no such thing as doing your best if your best is not good enough to get the job done." He turned to address the entire group. "Let this be a lesson to all of you. Police work is not about participation trophies or trying your hardest. It is about results. It is about being able to protect the public and yourselves. If you cannot do that, you have no business wearing a badge." As the group was dismissed for the day, Sarah walked slowly toward the locker room. Her entire body ached, and she felt more discouraged than she had ever felt in her life. Behind her, she could hear other recruits talking and laughing about her performance. "Did you see her trying to climb that rope?" one voice said. "It was like watching a kitten trying to climb a tree." "I feel bad for her," another voice replied. "But Martinez is right. She is going to get someone killed if she somehow makes it through training." In the locker room, Sarah sat on a bench and stared at the floor. Her training uniform was ruined, covered in mud and grass stains. Her hands were scraped and bleeding from trying to climb the wall. Every muscle in her body hurt. For the first time since deciding to become a police officer, Sarah seriously considered quitting. Maybe everyone was right. Maybe she was too small, too weak, too naive to do this job. Maybe she should go home, go to college and find a quiet job where she could help people in other ways. But as she sat there feeling sorry for herself, Sarah remembered something her father used to tell her when she was little and struggling with difficult homework problems. "Sarah," he would say, "the difference between people who succeed and people who fail is not how strong or smart they are. It is how they respond when things get difficult. Anyone can do well when things are easy. The real test is what you do when you want to give up. That evening, Sarah sat in her small bedroom surrounded by police training manuals, physical fitness guides, and notebooks filled with her own handwriting. Instead of giving up, she had decided to fight back in the only way she knew how. If she could not rely on natural physical strength, she would have to become smarter, more prepared, and more determined than everyone else. She created a detailed study schedule that had her waking up at 4 a.m. for extra physical training before the regular academy sessions began. She researched every aspect of police work she could find, from criminal law to crisis management to firearms training. Sarah understood that she would never be the fastest runner or the strongest fighter in her class, but she was determined to be the most knowledgeable and best prepared. The weeks that followed were the most difficult of Sarah's life. Every morning, she ran through her neighborhood in the dark, slowly building her endurance and speed. She did push-ups and sit-ups in her bedroom until her muscles screamed in protest. She practiced climbing techniques on playground equipment in the local park, ignoring the strange looks from early morning joggers. At the academy, the mockery continued. Sarah's performance improved gradually, but she was still at the bottom of the class in most physical categories. During hand-to-hand combat training, she was knocked down repeatedly by bigger, stronger recruits. During defensive driving courses, she struggled to handle the powerful training vehicles. And during firearms training, her small hands had difficulty managing the weight and recoil of the standard service weapon. "Chen still thinks she can make it," she heard one recruit whisper to another during lunch. "It is actually kind of sad at this point." But Sarah noticed something that her classmates missed. While they focused on her obvious weaknesses, they overlooked her growing strengths. Her test scores in criminal law, police procedures, and crisis management were consistently the highest in the class. During classroom discussions about handling difficult situations, her answers showed a level of thoughtfulness and preparation that impressed even the instructors. More importantly, Sarah was developing something that could not be taught in any manual: an unbreakable determination. Each failure, each moment of humiliation, each laugh from her classmates only made her more resolved to succeed. The turning point came during a training exercise in the academy's mock neighborhood, a section of the facility designed to look like real city streets, complete with buildings, cars, and various scenarios that police officers might encounter. The recruits were divided into pairs and given different emergency situations to handle. Sarah was paired with Jackson, the former Marine who had consistently scored highest in physical training. Their assignment was to respond to a domestic violence, call it a simulated apartment building. According to the scenario, a woman had called police saying her boyfriend was threatening her with a weapon. Jackson clearly thought he would be handling the situation, while Sarah would just observe. As they approached the building, he spoke in the confident tone that had made him popular with instructors and other recruits. "Just stay behind me, Chen," he said. "These domestic calls can get ugly fast, and you do not want to be in the way if things go bad." They entered the building and climbed to the second floor, where they could hear shouting coming from one of the apartments. Jackson pounded on the door with his fist. "Police, open the door!" The shouting stopped, and after a moment, the door opened. A man in his 30s appeared, clearly playing the role of the angry boyfriend. He was one of the academy instructors, and Sarah recognized him as someone who particularly enjoyed making training scenarios as realistic and challenging as possible. "What do you want?" the man demanded aggressively. Jackson stepped forward, his chest puffed out and his voice authoritative. "We received a call about a disturbance. We need to come in and make sure everyone is safe." "There is no disturbance here," the man replied, blocking the doorway with his body. "You cannot come in without a warrant." Jackson's face reddened. He was clearly frustrated by the man's refusal to cooperate. "Sir, we have probable cause to enter based on the emergency call we received. Step aside." "I know my rights," the man shot back. "You cannot force your way into my home." Sarah watched as Jackson became increasingly agitated. She could see that he was about to make a serious mistake, either by forcing his way into the apartment without proper legal justification, or by getting into a confrontational argument that would escalate the situation unnecessarily. Before Jackson could respond, Sarah stepped forward and spoke in a calm, respectful tone. "Excuse me, sir. I understand you are concerned about your rights and you are absolutely correct that we cannot enter your home without permission or a warrant under normal circumstances." The man looked surprised by her polite approach. Finally, someone who knows the law. "However," Sarah continued, "we did receive a call from someone inside this apartment saying they were in danger. That gives us legal authority to enter under the emergency doctrine to ensure everyone's safety. But I would prefer to handle this cooperatively rather than confrontationally. Would you be willing to let us speak with everyone in the apartment to verify that they are safe? It will only take a few minutes and then we can be on our way." The man studied Sarah's face for a long moment. She maintained eye contact but kept her expression non-threatening and respectful. Finally, he stepped back and opened the door wider. "Fine," he said, "but make it quick." Sarah and Jackson entered the apartment, where they found a woman sitting on a couch. She was also an instructor playing the role of the girlfriend who had made the emergency call. As they spoke with her, it became clear that the situation had been resolved and there was no immediate danger. Throughout the interaction, Sarah asked careful questions, took detailed notes, and handled the situation with professionalism that impressed both instructors. When they left the apartment 15 minutes later, the scenario had been completed successfully without any confrontation or legal complications. Jackson was quiet as they walked back toward the academy building. Finally, he spoke in a voice that sounded different from his usual confident tone. "How did you know all that stuff about emergency doctrine and warrant exceptions?" he asked. "I studied," Sarah replied simply. "I knew I could not rely on being the biggest or strongest person in situations like that, so I made sure I knew the law better than anyone else." Jackson nodded slowly. "That was pretty impressive back there. I was about to mess the whole thing up by trying to force my way in." It was the first time any of her classmates had acknowledged that Sarah might actually be good at something related to police work. But more importantly, it was the first time Sarah felt confident that she was developing skills that would make her an effective officer. That afternoon, Sergeant Martinez called Sarah into his office. She knocked on the door nervously, expecting another lecture about her physical limitations. "Sit down, Recruit Chen," he said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. Sarah sat down and waited for him to speak. Sergeant Martinez shuffled through some papers on his desk, then looked up at her with an expression she could not read. "I observed your performance during this morning's domestic violence scenario," he said. "The instructors who played the roles in that exercise gave me their feedback." Sarah's heart pounded. She wondered if she had made some mistake she was not aware of. "They told me that your handling of the situation was textbook perfect," Sergeant Martinez continued. "Your knowledge of the law, your de-escalation techniques, and your professionalism were all excellent. They said you managed a potentially difficult situation better than most experienced officers would have." Sarah felt a surge of relief and pride, but she tried not to let it show on her face. Sergeant Martinez leaned back in his chair. "I still have serious concerns about your physical capabilities, Recruit Chen, but today you showed me something that I had not seen before. You showed me that you understand police work is not just about physical strength. It is also about intelligence, preparation, and the ability to think clearly under pressure." 3 months into the training program, Sarah's transformation was becoming impossible to ignore. While she still struggled with some physical requirements, her improvement was steady and noticeable. More importantly, she had established herself as the academic leader of the class and had earned a reputation for handling complex scenarios with remarkable skill and composure. The other recruits had begun to change their attitude toward her. What started as mockery had evolved into grudging respect, and some had even begun asking her for help with their studies. Jackson, her former critic, now regularly studied with her in the evenings, and their friendship had become one of the strongest bonds in the class. But the real test of Sarah's progress came during advanced firearms training. This was the area where she faced her greatest challenge, and everyone knew it. The standard police service weapon was heavy and powerful, designed for officers who typically had larger hands and greater upper body strength than Sarah possessed. Sergeant Martinez had arranged for the entire class to spend a week at the state police firing range. where they would be trained by expert marksmen and tested on their ability to handle weapons safely and accurately under pressure. The training would culminate in a qualification test that every recruit had to pass in order to continue in the program. On the first day at the range, Sarah watched as her classmates fired their weapons with varying degrees of success. Most of them managed to hit their targets consistently, though few achieved the level of accuracy that would be considered excellent. When Sarah's turn came, she stepped up to the firing line with her heart pounding. The range instructor, Officer Davis, was known for being demanding but fair. He had trained thousands of police officers over his 20-year career and had a reputation for being able to help anyone improve their shooting skills if they were willing to work hard. "Take your time, recruit," Officer Davis said as Sarah raised her weapon. "Remember what we practiced about grip, stance, and breathing." Sarah fired her first shot and immediately felt the powerful recoil of the weapon. Her shot went wide, missing the target completely. She heard a few snickers from behind her but forced herself to focus on Officer Davis's instructions. "Adjust your grip," he said calmly. "The weapon is controlling you instead of you controlling it. Get a firmer hold and lean into it slightly." Sarah made the adjustments and fired again. This time her shot hit the target, though nowhere near the center ring. Over the next hour, she continued practicing while Officer Davis provided patient guidance. By the end of the session, she was hitting the target consistently, though her accuracy was still well below the level of most of her classmates. That evening, Sarah stayed late at the range to practice. Officer Davis noticed her dedication and offered to provide extra instruction after hours. "I have seen a lot of recruits struggle with firearms," he told her, "but I have never seen anyone work as hard as you do to improve. That kind of determination usually pays off if you stick with it." Night after night, Sarah practiced at the range. She studied everything she could find about marksmanship, watched training videos, and experimented with different techniques to find what worked best for her smaller frame. Slowly, her accuracy began to improve. But it was not just her shooting that was getting better. Sarah was developing an understanding of firearms that went beyond just pulling the trigger. She learned about weapon maintenance, safety protocols, different types of ammunition, and the legal aspects of when and how police officers could use their weapons. Once again, she was using knowledge and preparation to compensate for physical limitations. The qualification test was scheduled for Friday morning. To pass, each recruit had to score at least 80% accuracy from various distances and positions, including standing, kneeling, and prone positions. They also had to demonstrate their ability to reload quickly and handle weapon malfunctions under time pressure. Thursday evening, Sarah felt as prepared as she could possibly be. Her accuracy had improved dramatically over the week of intensive training, though she was still not as naturally gifted as some of her classmates. But she had something many of them lacked. She understood every aspect of the test thoroughly and had practiced each component hundreds of times. Friday morning arrived gray and cold, with a steady wind that would make accurate shooting more difficult. The recruits gathered at the range early, and Sarah could see the nervousness in many of their faces. Even Jackson, usually confident about everything, seemed tense as he checked and rechecked his equipment. "Remember," Sergeant Martinez announced to the group, "this is not just about hitting targets. You are being evaluated on safety, proper procedure, and your ability to perform under pressure. Anyone who fails this test will be dismissed from the program immediately." The recruits were tested in small groups. Sarah was placed in the third group, which meant she had to wait and watch as others took their turns. She tried to stay calm by reviewing her mental checklist of proper shooting techniques, but her heart was racing as she observed the mixed results of the earlier groups. Some recruits passed easily, while others struggled and a few failed completely. When Sarah's group was called to the firing line, she took her position and tried to block out everything except Officer Davis's training. The first stage of the test required 20 shots from a standing position at 25 yards. Sarah raised her weapon, took a deep breath, and began firing. Her first 5 shots were grouped tightly in the center of the target. She felt a surge of confidence and continued with steady, controlled shots. When the targets were examined, Sarah had scored 95% accuracy, one of the highest scores of the day so far. The second stage required shooting from a kneeling position at 15 yards. This was more challenging because the position was less stable, but Sarah had practiced it extensively. Again, her shots were accurate and consistent, scoring 92%. The prone position shooting was next, followed by rapid-fire exercises and weapon malfunction drills. Throughout each stage, Sarah performed with remarkable composure and accuracy. By the time the test was completed, she had achieved an overall score of 93%, the highest score in the entire class. The other recruits stared at Sarah in amazement. Jackson shook his head in disbelief. "I cannot believe it," he said. "Chen just outshot everyone in the class, including guys who have been hunting and shooting their whole lives." Sergeant Martinez walked over to where Sarah was standing. His expression was unreadable as he looked at the test results on his clipboard. The entire group fell silent, waiting to hear what he would say. "Recruit Chen," he said finally, "when you first arrived at this academy, I thought you were wasting everyone's time. I thought you were too small, too weak, and too naive to ever become a police officer." Sarah felt her stomach drop, wondering if he was about to add a "but" to that statement, or if this was leading to more criticism. "I was wrong," Sergeant Martinez continued. "Not about your physical limitations, those are real. But I was wrong about what those limitations mean. Today, you have proven something very important. You have shown that excellence in police work comes not just from natural ability, but from dedication, intelligence, and the refusal to accept defeat." He held up the test results so everyone could see them. Recruit Chen achieved the highest firearms qualification score this academy has seen in over 5 years. But more than that, she has demonstrated the kind of character and determination that makes great police officers. Sergeant Martinez turned to address the entire group. "Let this be a lesson to all of you. Never underestimate someone because of their size or their appearance. Judge people by their actions, their preparation, and their commitment to excellence." As the group walked back toward the academy building, Sarah felt a sense of accomplishment unlike anything she had ever experienced. But she also knew this was just one test, one moment of success in what would be a long career filled with challenges. The real work was still ahead of her. The final 2 months of academy training brought increasingly complex scenarios designed to prepare recruits for the unpredictable reality of police work. Sarah had earned the respect of her classmates and instructors through her academic excellence and firearms proficiency. But she knew that the ultimate test would come when she faced real situations on the streets. During this period, the recruits participated in advanced scenario training that included everything from high-speed vehicle pursuits to hostage negotiations. Sarah approached each exercise with the same methodical preparation that had become her trademark. While other recruits relied on instinct and physical presence, Sarah studied every possible outcome and prepared multiple response strategies for each situation. One particular training exercise would prove to be a turning point, not just for Sarah, but for how everyone viewed her potential as a police officer. The scenario was designed to be one of the most challenging, a simulated active shooter situation in a shopping mall, with multiple civilians to protect and a suspect who was armed and dangerous. The recruits were divided into teams of 4, and Sarah found herself grouped with Jackson, a recruit named Maria Rodriguez who had struggled with confidence throughout the program, and Tom Wilson, a former security guard who had a tendency to act impulsively. Sergeant Martinez made it clear that this exercise would count heavily toward their final evaluation. The scenario began with reports of gunshots in the mall's food court. The team had to respond quickly while coordinating with other units and ensuring civilian safety. As they approached the mock mall facility, Sarah could feel the tension radiating from her teammates. Jackson, despite his friendship with Sarah, naturally assumed the leadership role as they developed their response strategy. "Okay, here's the plan," he said as they prepared their equipment. "Tom and I will go in first and locate the suspect. Sarah, you and Maria hang back and help with crowd control." Sarah had studied active shooter protocols extensively and knew that Jackson's approach was not optimal. "Actually," she said respectfully, "the current best practice is for all officers to work as a coordinated team rather than splitting up. If we separate, We lose our tactical advantage and create communication problems. Tom shook his head impatiently. We do not have time for a debate, Chen. People are getting shot in there. Which is exactly why we need to do this right, Sarah replied firmly. If we go in unprepared, we could end up making the situation worse instead of better. Maria looked nervous about the disagreement among her teammates. Maybe we should just follow Jackson's plan, she suggested quietly. Sarah realized that she was at a crucial moment. She could either defer to Jackson's leadership and potentially watch the exercise go badly, or she could assert herself and take responsibility for the outcome. Everything she had learned and worked for during the past 5 months came down to this decision. Listen, Sarah said, looking each of her teammates in the eye. I know I'm not the biggest or strongest person on this team, but I have spent more time studying active shooter protocols than anyone else here. I know exactly how we should handle this situation if we want to maximize our chances of success and minimize casualties. Jackson started to protest, but Sarah continued. The statistics show that coordinated team responses result in faster suspect apprehension and fewer civilian casualties. If we follow proper procedure, we have a much better chance of ending this safely. She quickly outlined a tactical approach based on current law enforcement best practices. Her plan involved the team moving together in formation, using communication protocols to coordinate their actions, and establishing containment before confrontation. It was more complex than Jackson's straightforward approach, but it was also more likely to succeed. Jackson looked uncertain for a moment, then nodded. Okay, Chen, you obviously know this stuff better than the rest of us. We will do it your way. As they entered the mock mall, Sarah felt the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. If her plan failed, it would not just affect her own evaluation, but could potentially put her teammates at a disadvantage as well. But she was confident in her preparation and knowledge. The scenario unfolded exactly as Sarah had anticipated. The suspect, played by one of the academy instructors, had positioned himself in the food court, where he had a view of multiple entrances and access to numerous civilian hostages. Sarah's team approached using the coordinated formation she had suggested, communicating through hand signals and radio whispers. Sarah directed her team to establish a perimeter that would prevent the suspect from escaping, while also creating safe evacuation routes for civilians. She had studied dozens of real active shooter incidents and knew that the key was to control the situation methodically, rather than rushing in aggressively. Jackson, take position by the main entrance, Sarah whispered into her radio. Tom, cover the side exit. Maria, you are with me. We are going to establish contact with the suspect and try to de-escalate. As they moved into position, Sarah spotted several civilian actors hiding behind overturned tables and food court chairs. Her training kicked in immediately. Instead of ignoring them to focus solely on the suspect, she used hand signals to guide them towards safe evacuation routes while simultaneously keeping her weapon ready and maintaining visual contact with the threat. The suspect noticed their approach and shouted, "Stay back. I will start shooting people if you come any closer." This was the critical moment. Sarah knew that many officers, especially inexperienced ones, would either retreat or attempt to rush the suspect at this point. But her extensive study of negotiation techniques had taught her that there was often a third option. "Sir, my name is Officer Chen," Sarah called out in a calm, steady voice. "I can see that you are upset about something. I want to help you resolve this situation safely. Can you tell me what is wrong?" The instructor playing the suspect was clearly impressed by Sarah's approach. He stayed in character, but responded in a way that showed he was following proper training protocols for this type of scenario. "Nobody cares about what is wrong," the suspect yelled back. "You people never listen until someone gets hurt." Sarah continued to move slowly and deliberately, using cover effectively while maintaining the dialogue. "I am listening right now, sir. I want to understand what brought you to this point, but I also need to make sure everyone here stays safe, including you." Behind her, Sarah could hear Jackson and Tom moving into their assigned positions. Maria stayed close, providing backup and helping to guide civilians to safety. The team was functioning exactly as Sarah had planned. "The system is broken," the suspect continued. "Nobody cares about regular people anymore." Sarah recognized that the instructor was creating an opening for negotiation. She had studied enough real cases to know that many active shooter situations involved people who felt powerless and ignored by society. The key was to make them feel heard while slowly gaining control of the situation. "You are right that the system has problems," Sarah replied. "And I can see that you feel like nobody has been listening to your concerns. But hurting innocent people will not fix those problems. It will just create more pain for everyone, including yourself." As she spoke, Sarah was also coordinating with her team through subtle hand signals. She directed Jackson to begin slowly, evacuating civilians from his position, while Tom maintained overwatch from the side. The entire operation was proceeding with the kind of smooth coordination that typically required years of experience. After several more minutes of careful negotiation, Sarah had managed to establish enough rapport with the suspect that he agreed to put down his weapon. The scenario ended with a peaceful resolution, 0 civilian casualties, and the suspect taken into custody without incident. As the exercise concluded, the observing instructors gathered to debrief the team's performance. Sergeant Martinez was among them, along with Captain Williams, the academy director who rarely participated in individual training exercises. "That was textbook perfect," Officer Davis announced to the group. "The coordination, the tactical approach, the negotiation techniques, and the concern for civilian safety were all exactly what we hoped to see from experienced officers, let alone recruits." Captain Williams stepped forward. "I have been watching police academy training for 15 years, she said. What I just observed was one of the most professionally executed responses to an active shooter scenario that I have ever seen from recruits at any level of training." She looked directly at Sarah. "Recruit Chen, your leadership during that exercise was exceptional. You demonstrated tactical knowledge, decision-making skills, and command presence that many veterans would envy." Jackson spoke up. "Captain, I want to make sure you know that Sarah planned and directed that entire operation. She knew exactly what to do from the beginning, and she got all of us to work together better than we ever have before." Tom nodded, in agreement. "I was ready to just charge in there and probably mess everything up. Chen made us do it the right way, and it worked perfectly." Even Maria, who had been quiet throughout most of the training program, found her voice. "Sarah has been helping all of us study and improve for months. She deserves all the credit for how well we performed today." Captain Williams smiled. "What I find most impressive, Recruit Chen, is not just your technical knowledge, but your ability to lead a team and make everyone around you better. That is a rare quality in officers of any experience level." Sergeant Martinez walked over to Sarah. For the first time since she had known him, he looked genuinely proud. "Chen, when you first walked into my academy 5 months ago, I thought you were making a big mistake. I thought you would wash out in the first week." He paused and looked around at the other recruits. "I have never been happier to be wrong about someone. You have shown everyone here, including me, that being a great police officer is not about being the biggest or the strongest person in the room. It is about being smart, prepared, dedicated, and having the courage to do what is right, even when it is difficult." Sarah felt overwhelmed by the praise, but also deeply satisfied. All the early morning training sessions, all the late nights, studying, all the moments of doubt and humiliation had led to this point. She had not just proven that she could be a police officer, she had proven that she could be a leader. As the group walked back toward the academy building, Jackson fell into step beside Sarah. "You know," he said, "I owe you an apology for how I acted when you first got here. I thought physical strength was the most important thing for police work. But watching you handle that scenario, I realized that brain power and heart matter just as much, maybe more." Sarah smiled at her friend. "We all bring different strengths to the job, Jackson. The best teams are made up of people with different abilities who support each other." "Well," Jackson replied, "I know that when I graduate and start working as a real police officer, I hope I get partnered with someone like you. I would feel a lot safer knowing I had backup who could think their way out of any situation. With only 2 weeks left before graduation, Sarah felt ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. But she also knew that her real education was just beginning. Graduation day arrived with bright sunshine and a sense of accomplishment that filled the academy training facility. Of the 42 recruits who had begun the program 6 months earlier, 38 had successfully completed all requirements and were ready to become police officers. Sarah stood with her classmates in the formation they had practiced, wearing her crisp new uniform and feeling a mixture of pride and anticipation for what lay ahead. The ceremony was attended by families, academy staff, and representatives from various police departments who would soon be welcoming the new officers. Sarah's grandmother sat in the front row, her eyes filled with tears of joy and worry in equal measure. She had watched her granddaughter transform over the past months from a quiet, uncertain young woman into a confident professional ready to serve her community. Captain Williams delivered the main address to the graduating class. 6 months ago, you entered this academy as individuals with different backgrounds, different strengths, and different motivations. Today, you leave as police officers, united by your commitment to protect and serve the public. She paused and looked across the assembled graduates. During your training, you have learned that police work requires more than just physical strength or courage. It requires intelligence, compassion, sound judgment, and the ability to work as part of a team. Some of you discovered strengths you did not know you possessed. Others learned to overcome limitations you thought would prevent you from succeeding. As Captain Williams spoke, Sarah thought about her journey from that first humiliating day of physical training to becoming the academic leader of her class. She remembered the laughter and doubts of her classmates, the stern warnings from Sergeant Martinez, and her own moments of uncertainty when she wondered if she was making a terrible mistake. But she also remembered the late nights studying, the extra hours at the firing range, and the gradual realization that she had found her calling in police work. More than that, she had discovered that her supposed weaknesses could be transformed into strengths through preparation, determination, and a willingness to approach problems differently than others might. When the individual recognitions began, Sarah was surprised to hear her name called for several awards. She received the Academic Excellence Award for maintaining the highest grade point average throughout the program. She received the Marksmanship Award for her outstanding performance in firearms training. And finally, she received the Leadership Award for her exceptional performance during scenario training and her positive influence on her fellow recruits. As Sarah walked across the stage to accept each award, she could hear applause from her classmates that sounded different from the polite clapping given to other recipients. It was enthusiastic and genuine, the kind of recognition that comes from people who had witnessed a remarkable transformation and wanted to celebrate it. Sergeant Martinez presented the Leadership Award, and as he handed Sarah the plaque, he spoke quietly so only she could hear. "Chen, I want you to know that, in my 25 years of training police officers, I have never seen a recruit develop the way you have. You have taught all of us, including me, some important lessons about what it means to be a police officer." After the ceremony, as families and graduates mingled in the academy courtyard, Sarah was approached by Lieutenant Rodriguez, a supervisor from the Metro Police Department who had been observing the training program throughout the final months. "Officer Chen," Lieutenant Rodriguez said, extending her hand. "Congratulations on your graduation and your outstanding performance during training. I wanted to speak with you about your assignment." Sarah shook the lieutenant's hand, wondering what kind of assignment a new officer with her background might receive. She had assumed she would be placed in a quiet neighborhood patrol position where her lack of experience would be less of a liability. "Based on your academy performance and the recommendations from your instructors," Lieutenant Rodriguez continued, "we would like to offer you a position in our community policing division. The work focuses on building relationships between the police department and the neighborhoods we serve, crime prevention through community engagement, and handling situations that require strong communication and problem-solving skills rather than just physical enforcement." Sarah felt a surge of excitement. Community policing was exactly the kind of work she had envisioned when she first decided to become a police officer. "That sounds perfect, Lieutenant. I would be honored to accept." that assignment. There is one more thing, Lieutenant Rodriguez added. The position comes with an accelerated training track that could lead to detective work or specialized units if you continue to perform at the level you demonstrated in the academy. We believe officers with your analytical skills and attention to detail have great potential for advancement in investigative work. As Lieutenant Rodriguez walked away, Jackson approached with a wide grin on his face. So, what did the lieutenant want? He asked. When Sarah told him about her assignment to community policing, Jackson whistled appreciatively. That is fantastic, Sarah. That division handles some really important work, and they usually do not offer those positions to brand new officers. What about you? Sarah asked. Where are you being assigned? Patrol Division, 3rd District, Jackson replied, which is exactly what I expected and wanted. I think I am better suited for regular patrol work than the specialized stuff you will be doing. As they talked, other graduates joined the conversation. Maria had been assigned to the Traffic Division, where her attention to detail and careful approach would be valuable for accident investigation work. Tom was going to the Downtown Patrol Unit, where his security experience would be useful for handling the various situations that arose in the busy city center. You know what is funny? Maria said as the group stood together in the courtyard. 6 months ago, most of us probably would have predicted that Jackson would get the special assignment, and Sarah would end up in some quiet corner, where she would not have to deal with dangerous situations. Shows how much we knew back then, Tom added. Sarah turned out to be the best police officer among all of us, and she did it by being smarter and more prepared than everyone else. Jackson nodded in agreement. I learned more from studying with Sarah than I did from any other part of the training program. She has a way of breaking down complex situations and figuring out the best approach that I have never seen before. As the afternoon wore on and the celebration began to wind down, Sarah walked over to where her grandmother was sitting on a bench, watching the activities with a thoughtful expression. Grandmother, are you okay? Sarah asked, sitting down beside the older woman. You look worried. Her grandmother turned to look at Sarah with eyes that held both pride and concern. I am so proud of what you have accomplished, Sarah. When you told me you wanted to be a police officer, I was frightened because I thought it was too dangerous for someone like you. But now I see that you found a way to be the kind of police officer who makes things better, instead of just responding to problems. She paused and took Sarah's hand. But I still worry. Police work is dangerous, no matter how smart and well-trained you are. Promise me you will be careful and remember that coming home safely is more important than being brave. Sarah squeezed her grandmother's hand. I promise I will be careful, grandmother. And I promise I will use everything I learned in the academy to be the best police officer I can be. I want to help people the way I always dreamed I could. As they sat together watching the other families celebrate, Sarah reflected on how much had changed since that first day, when Sergeant Martinez had questioned whether she belonged in police work. She had proven to herself and everyone else that determination, intelligence, and proper preparation could overcome almost any obstacle. But more importantly, she had learned that being different from what people expected did not mean being less capable. Sometimes it meant being more capable in ways that others had not considered. The laughter and doubts that had greeted her arrival at the academy had been transformed into respect and recognition for her unique strengths and contributions. Now, as Officer Sarah Chen prepared to begin her career in law enforcement, she felt ready to face whatever challenges awaited her. She had learned to turn the tide not through force or intimidation, but through knowledge, skill, and an unshakable commitment to serving others. The girl who had been laughed at on day one had become the officer that others looked up to, and her real work was just beginning. Sarah looked up at the academy building one last time, then walked toward her new future with confidence and determination. She had taken their doubts and turned them into her greatest strengths, and now she was ready to show the world what kind of police officer she could be.